In this lesson, we will look at the forces you can use to manipulate physics objects in-game. There are two types of forces we will cover, and they both can be found in the common category under the subheading Physics. First, we'll look at the area effector. This tool creates an area within which force can be applied to objects. If you're familiar with the Wind tools in Trials HD, this is very similar, of course with many more customization options. When I first spawn one in the world, you may notice a bubble made out of yellow dotted lines. This represents the area within which the force is applied. The arrow coming out of the tool's icon is the direction of that force. Now let's check out the properties. As usual, we start off with a few familiar options, so let's skip down. Shape simply determines the shape of the area, sphere or cube. Size adjusts the size of the affected area. Unlike other tools we've discussed with these bubbles, the size cannot be adjusted in the editor with the triggers. Next we have the Force Settings submenu. In here is of course where we really get to play with how the force works. Directional force is the amount of force applied. There are no real common settings here, as the amount of force you need will vary based on other factors, like the weight and momentum of the objects you are trying to affect. Usually this will take a little trial and error to find the best force setting. Rejection force is a little different. Instead of constantly pushing objects in the direction the tool is pointing, it applies force in all directions emanating from the center of the area effector. Fade determines how strong the force is at different points within the bubble. At 100%, the force is strongest at the center while there is no force on the outside edges. At 0%, the force is constant throughout the bubble. We've discussed damping already when discussing object physics. Here there is no difference between linear and angular. You can just increase the overall damping so that when objects enter the area, their movement will be slowed. Inverted reverses the direction of the force, and applied damage determines if the force can damage objects that enter it. For example, a strong force could easily be enough to destroy the bike or knock out the rider. With this box unchecked, objects will feel the full power of the force without any of the pain. And finally, we get to choose affected objects in another submenu. Type refers to how it decides what objects are affected. Include means that whatever objects are selected in this menu will be affected. Exclude means that the objects will not be affected, but any other objects will be. First, you have a few checkboxes for some common choices. Bike and rider should need no explanation. Dynamic objects means any object with dynamic physics active, and particles refers mainly to visual effects like fire, smoke, waterfalls, etc. You can also pick specific objects. With select object instances, you can choose each object individually, or with select object type, you can pick a specific object. So for example, if you point object types to a metal barrel, then any metal barrel that enters that area will be affected. Now let's take a look at the directional force. The big difference here is that the directional force doesn't affect an area. Instead, it can be tied to a specific object to just affect that object or glue group. The force can be connected to an object by gluing, or in some cases you may want to use a physics hinge, which we will cover a little later. Bring up the properties menu and we can take a look at what we've got to work with. In here, the first option we'll look at is type. This determines how the force reacts based on the objects it is connected to. With local, the force is tied directly to the object it is connected to, so if that object turns, the force turns as well. The global setting will always keep the force aiming the same direction, regardless of its affected object's position and rotation. And finally, target will allow you to select an object to aim the force at. If that object moves, the force changes direction to stay aimed at it. Next is force. This is the amount of force applied by the tool. And just like with the area effector, how much force you need depends on what you are trying to do. Finally, also just like with the area effector, inverted reverses the direction of the force.